In this video, we're going to build a web app using Google Sheets and Metro UI. You don't have to use Metro UI, even though that's what I'm going to use here. A lot of what I'm going to cover is going to be applicable if you just want to use plain HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or Bootstrap or something like that. I am going to use Metro UI just because it has some nice built-in like drop-downs like this where you can search and find whatever option you want to find in the list like this. So that would not be that easy to build from scratch. So it's built in the framework. So that would make things like that a little easier. And it has a lot of other nice things you could use out of the box. Now, the way this is going to work, if I just reload this is just a form and it has this little gray part on top. This is for free accounts. If your account is a part of Google Workspace, you would not be getting that. You can also remove that gray bar by embedding this as an iframe inside of a different website. I have some videos how to do this. You could put it like in Google Sites or something, and then it will hide that top portion. The way this works, we basically have this form with some fields. And if I try to hit submit, there are some fields that are required. See, they get highlighted red. We're going to enter those fields, so it wouldn't let me submit until I actually fill in those required fields. So I'm going to go ahead and enter some information here. Some of these are not required, so I don't have to enter anything. There's also a checkbox here we can check. So now, once I enter this information, if I hit submit, see we get that little loading bar while it's actually adding that information, and now it's done. It says, thanks for submitting. We can go back to form and submit more. And at this point, if I go back to my spreadsheet here, see that record was entered as a new line in my spreadsheet here in Google Sheets. Should probably make this bold. So there's also this settings tab. And as you can see, it basically has a bunch of categories listed here. And in our form, this list of categories, that's where it comes from. So it's dynamically pulling that list from that spreadsheet, and it basically just autofills this right here. And that's what we're going to build in this video. So let's get started. Okay, so I have an empty spreadsheet. Let's just name this. And I'm going to go under extensions and app script to open app script. I'm going to name this project as well. And we'll start by creating an HTML file. So I'm going to go under plus, do HTML, and I'll call this index. So we could build our own HTML, CSS, and all of that, but I don't want to spend hours building HTML and CSS. So for that reason, I'm going to use Metro UI to make the whole thing faster. Now you could use your own, you could also use Bootstrap. The reason I'm going with Metro UI is because it has some cool drop-downs we could use, and those would not be easy to build if you had to build them from scratch. So here, I'll just go to their documentation. I'll link to this page so you can get to this. I'm just going to scroll down until I get this starter template right here and just copy this. And we'll go back here and I'm going to paste it right below this whole thing. And I'm just going to add this base tag right here. And then I can just delete whatever it was in here to begin with. So this way we'll have our starter template and it links to all the CSS and JavaScript that Metro UI needs. So this currently just says hello world as an H1. Let's just say web form. And at this point, let's just make sure we can load this HTML. So I'm going to go to this code.js and we're going to create doGet function, which is a special function that our web app is going to call when the page is loaded. And here what we're going to do, we're going to create a variable. I'm going to call it HTML service. And we're going to create an HTML service, and we need to create HTML output. Now there are different ways to do this. I'm going to use this template from file method. And the reason for that is because this will allow us later to use some scripts within our HTML. So I'm going to do this, and file name is going to be index in quotes, which refers to this file name right here. And then I'm going to render that HTML by taking that HTML service and evaluating that. And at this point, we can just return that HTML, referring to this variable right here. Now, on this, we may also want to set some meta tags to support responsive content. So I'm going to do add meta tag right here. And this is going to ask for a name and content. So for name, let's just comma separate this. So for name, I'm going to go back to this index.html, and you'll see we got this meta tag right here. So the name is going to be this viewport. So I'm going to copy that and paste it here. And the content will be this. So I'm going to copy this and paste it right there. So there we are. We set our basic setup like this. We get our HTML, we return our HTML. So now let's just deploy our head deployment so we can actually work on this and see what's actually going on. So I'm going to go under deploy and do new deployment. And we're going to make a web app. And here we're going to do some sort of description for this. How you want to deploy this web app. So I have videos covering differences here. Right now, I'm just going to do execute as me. And who has access. So here, I'm just going to do anyone. So basically, it will make it public. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy this. So I'm going to hit done. And at this point, we should have a dev link. And the way we can access that dev link, we can go under this deploy and do test deployments. And here we have our dev link. So if I just go ahead and open this, see that opens this, it says web form, which is basically what we had here in our H1. So now that loads this page here. So let's build our interface now. So I'm going to go back to our HTML. Now let's build a form. So I'm going to start by going to our Metro UI documentation. Let's go to this components section. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. Let's just put some container so we can later do some column layouts and things like that if necessary. So I'm going to go to containers. You'll see there are two types of containers here. I'm going to go with the regular container here. I'm going to just copy this, go back and paste that right there. So everything we have will go within this container. Now, inside of that container, we're going to need a row, and then possibly we can split that to columns and things like that. So to do so, we'll go back here and go to this grid system. And you'll see we have this examples of grid systems. And there's explanation of how this works. What I'll do, I'll just scroll down until I get one of these examples like this. So it has this grid opening and grid closing for this div. Copy this, go back and paste that within this container, like so. I'm going to tab this in using tab on my keyboard, just so that I align these things properly. I recommend to spend the time to align your content properly, because as you add more content in your HTML, then it becomes a big mess and it's very difficult to keep track of what's going on. So what I'll do here, I'll remove this part and I'll remove this and even this div right here. So right now, I don't want to break this down into columns or anything. So if we want to have something that spans across the whole thing, See, we have this cell and dash and a number, and the full row size is 12. So if I do cell dash 12, that should go across the entire space. It's good enough, so I'm going to hit enter, and inside of this, we'll do what we have to. So what I'll do, I'll go back again to our documentation, and let's get to forms now. Right here, we have our forms. So if I keep scrolling down here, see we have form components, but I'm going to start with this forms up here. So here's an example form. So what I'll do here, I'll just copy this form, go back to our HTML, and I'm actually going to paste this outside of this row for now, but within the grid. And I'll tab this in. So this is the start of the form. This is the end of this form. Then we have this div, form group, whatever it's called. And we have this email input with a label. There's this small text. I'm going to get rid of that. And my first input is going to just ask for the first name. So I'll just do first name. And the type will be text, not email. And we'll have a placeholder first name, just like that. The placeholder will be visible for the user. So we want to make sure we do this. I'm going to get rid of this password. I'll keep the rest of these for now. So at this point, because we have a dev link, if I save this and go back and just refresh this, we should be able to see what I did so far. So I have this first name input box, then I have this checkbox, and then I have these two buttons. So by the way, I'm really zoomed in here. So let me just zoom out to like normal level. So this is pretty much what this would look like at this point. So you can see how this web form goes all the way to the left here, while this kind of ends here. And the reason for that is because when I did this container right here, this H1 is outside of the container. So if I take this H1 now and move it inside of this container, someplace here, now if I go back and reload this, you'll see how that container now will ensure that it doesn't go outside of this box. So now we have like this box enclosing this form, so it doesn't go all the way left. So let's add something else for last names here. So I'm going to go here, and we'll basically just copy this and paste it below. Zoom in here, last name, and last name. And if I save this, and we go back and reload this, now you'll see I got first name and last name. So these would go on top of each other. If you want them next to each other, you're going to have to start using the grid system. And that would be this part right here. So what I could do, I could take this row structure and put this right above this first and last name right here. And then I'm going to close it here, where that row kind of ends. And then this first name should be the first column. This should be the second column. So for columns, we're going to use this cell. So right now, if I go back and put this first div inside of this div with a 12, I'm going to copy this ending and put it right below this div. So now this div, see, goes around this form group, which is the first name. I'm going to tab this in. And then I'm going to do the same for this second one. So I'm going to copy this, paste it below, and then we'll do another closing div right here. And I'll tab this one in as well. So now we should have this row with two columns within the row. Now, right now, those column sizes are 12. which means if I save this and reload, we should get pretty much the same thing, because 12 will take the whole area. Now, if I change that 12 to 6, that would be half of 12 for both of these. And if we reload this, now we got, see, side by side, half and half for our first name and last name. So let's go back to their docs for a second. So here, see, under this forms, we have this input, which is what we have right now, and we have this metro input, which seems to go all the way through. So let's try to use this. So this is the class metro input. So I'm going to copy that, go back, and I'm going to add that class to this input right here and this input here too. So we're going to save that, go back and reload. So now we got these things. So now they take the entire space and they also push this down to the next line. Now this still takes too much space for me, this entire thing. Their default container, as you can see, is pretty large. I want this to be pretty small on a page, so I'm gonna make my own container for this. So what I'll do, I'll go back here, and this thing that says container right here, that's the default class they have. So I'm gonna create my own container. I'm gonna call this container small. And then we need to style that container in our CSS. So I'm going to create a style tag here. This should be closing the tag. There it is. And we're going to target this class container dash small. And we do that by doing dot and that class. So that means class in CSS, the period. So now for this, I'm going to set a max size, max width, and I'll try something like 400px to see what it looks like. To make sure this is centered, because right now, if I just save this and go back and reload, see, it's 400, but now it's not centered in the middle of this whole thing. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to do margin 0 from top and bottom, and I'll do automatic margin left and right. And that automatic margin should center this. Let's make this 600 instead of 400. Save this, reload. So now this is centered, as you can see, and we got our container to be a lot smaller than the default container. We'll think about spacing and stuff like that later. So for now, this is good enough. I got first and last name. Let's now add a dropdown over here. So for that, I'm going to go back again to their documentation. And dropdown would be select. So here on the right, see, I have different types of elements. Select is one of them. If I click on it, that brings me here. It gives me an example. And here's their first example they have. That's exactly what I'm going to use. I'm going to copy this, go back to our own HTML, and scroll down. So I need this below this row that I did here. So I'm going to go below this and paste. And I'm going to tab this. Now, we need to keep the structure. So I have this row, then 2 columns. Now, this next line, I'm going to again do a row around this select this time. You could type this, copy paste, whatever makes it easy for you. Tab this select in, all nicely aligned. And then again, I'm going to create the cell div, which is basically the column inside of the row. And I'll keep size 6, which is half again. And see, they have this class with a color. I don't want that, so I'm going to get rid of these classes. And they have the second option selected, which I also don't want, so I'm going to get rid of that. So now we have these options 1, 2, 3. So let's just save this and see what this looks like, and we'll take it from there. So I'm going to go back and reload. Now that creates this dropdown. See in the next line, and we have our 1, 2, 3, which also has a nice search that we can use to kind of narrow it down. We do probably need a label for this. So I'll just take one of these labels. I'm not sure if we need to put it in a form group. I guess we're going to find out. So I'm going to take this label right now and put it up here to see what happens. So let's actually change this up a little bit. Let's call this department. And we'll call this sales, marketing, and other. And if I want more of these, I just copy paste one of these options. And I did that by going to the right here, Command C, Command V. And then we can just name this whatever we like. So at this point, if I save this, go back and reload, see we got this new label that says department. We got the sales, which is the first option we have here. And we got like marketing, we got analytics, we got other in this box. And we should be able to also just copy paste this and make the first option empty like this. And I'm also going to try to make this disabled. Let's also make this selected. Now let's try to reload this and see what happens. So you can see now the default is empty. And I can open this, but I cannot pick that empty one. I can pick one of these other ones from here. See? Again, it's up to you. Do you want it to automatically select the first option, or you want an empty option to begin with, which is this? I'm going to leave it like this. It's good. So I got my first, last name. I got department. I'll do another drop down right next to this, which will be pretty much the same thing all over again, right? So we'll just take this whole column from div to div. And this is why it's important to align things properly so you can see what you're copying and pasting. So I'm going to copy this, go back here and paste. So now I got 2 of these. And for the second one, we'll just, again, create some name. And some options, right? Whatever they are. So at this point, we should have 2 drop downs. Again, because I did that 6 and 6, we should have 2 columns. And you could work out your column sizes. So if you don't want this to be like half and half, you could go here and change this 6, say to 4, and this one to 8. And that will make the second column bigger than the first column, so long as the total is 12. You could also do like 4, 4, and then do a third column here by adding another one of these columns, divs below. For me, I wanted half and half. That was good enough for me, so I'm going to go with that. And that takes care of my drop downs and my input boxes. So one more thing I'm going to add here is a text area. So I'm going to go back to, again, their docs. Let's find, see here under forms text area. So as you can see, there are multiple options here you could use. Doesn't really matter for me. I'll just use, I guess, this second one, auto size or whatever this is. Copy this. I'm going to go back to my HTML and I want this below this row I did here. So again, I need another one of those rows here. First, I'm going to just paste that text area, and then I'll create that row structure around this text area. And we want to be careful and make sure we don't accidentally break this structure and miss one of these div openings and closings. Then I'm going to do the column within this row that opens here, and it needs to close here, and text area will go inside. And I'll try to also add a label for this. and I'll just call it notes or something. Let's save this and see what this looks like again. So now we got, see, text area. I want this to go across the whole thing. So I'll go back and change this size to 12. So that should take care of that. And then we have a checkbox, so we'll leave that. But I'm going to again make sure I put that within a row and a column. So I'm going to copy these two. We'll tab this. I don't think we need this form group here, but I'll keep it anyways. And I'm going to make sure I have my closing div tags. So one for the column and one for the row. And we'll just add some text for this. So that takes care of that checkbox. And finally, we have the actual submit button. I don't need this cancel button. I'll just call this one submit. And again, I'll put the button within a similar structure. I'll take the row and column, have this up here, tab this in, and we'll close the column first and then the row next. So now within this form, we made this structure of rows and columns, and that entire form sits within this div grid, which is going to close down here. This was my sample, so I could work with this. I'm going to get rid of that. Now this closing div is going to close this grid. Let's add a space here. And then this div down here is going to close this small container I have on top. So if I save this, go back and reload. Now we have this, takes the whole space. We have this checkbox and we have the submit button. And that's pretty much visually what our form is going to look like. Later, I may add some more CSS to just space things out a little bit. But for now, this is good enough. Now let's try to get this information and send it to our spreadsheet. So to do that, first we're going to add names to all of our different inputs. So we got this input for first name. So I'm going to add a name attribute for this. And this attributes cannot have spaces in their names. So I'm going to just call it first name like this with camel casing. And then for this one, I'm going to add a name tag as well. And this will be last name. Then for the select, again, I'm going to add a name. And I'm going to have to do this for all of these. So I'll call it department. We want to make sure all these names are unique because these names is the way we're going to grab this information later. And for the button, I don't need a name because I don't need to grab any information from the button. So for all my inputs, select boxes, etc., I now have a unique name. Now, the last thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to add an ID to this form. And I'll just call it contact form. Cannot have spaces, but I could have this dash. So at this point, we can move on to writing some JavaScript so we can send the information from here to the backend. And we'll do that by adding a script tag below this entire thing and below this Metro UI script. So I'm going to do a script. We could put this on top and add defer tag to that, but I'm just going to keep it simple. Just put it below this whole thing. Zoom in a little bit. This is where we're going to write our own JavaScript. And what we need to do with this JavaScript, we need to first grab this form that I just did. And the form ID is contact form. So let's start by grabbing that form. So I'm going to go here in the script. I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call it contact form. And we'll take our document object and do get element by ID. Everything here is case sensitive, so you want to be careful to make sure you don't mistype one of these characters. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And we're going to point to that contact form ID. So that's our form. Now, we want to make sure that that form doesn't submit the default way it does. So the default behavior in browsers is this. If I go back right now and hit submit, it will submit it to, well, in this case, to nowhere, really. We want to prevent this so it doesn't do that when we hit submit, and we want to handle it our own way. So to do so, we're going to add an event handler to this contact form. So I'm going to do contact form. And we're going to do add event listener. And the event is going to be submit. And we're going to say what we want to do when this happens. So after the comma, it's going to be the function that it's going to run when you submit the form. So I'm just going to call this submit data. Now this function doesn't exist, so we're going to have to create it. So I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to create that function. Submit data. And this is going to accept an E argument, which is the event. And we want to prevent the default behavior. So we can do that by taking that event object and do prevent default, like this. So this should now stop this from submitting that like it used to do before. So if I save this, assuming I got everything done correctly, at this point, if I reload this and try to hit submit, see, it doesn't do anything. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to make sure the default behavior doesn't work so we can handle it in our own way. So now, how are we going to handle that? So what we're going to do, we're going to basically take that information of that form and we're going to submit it to our backend so we can handle that information. And to do so, first we need a backend function that's going to accept that information. So we're going to go to this backend called GS and we're going to create a function. So we're going to call this accept data. You could call it anything you want. This is probably not the best name. I'm just going to go with this. And this is going to accept that form data here. So for now, there's nothing I'm going to do in this function. I'll just create this function. It's an empty function. Now, the way we would run this function from this HTML side, we would go here and do google.script.run, and then that function name. The function is called accept data. And within this parentheses, we can now send this, what I called form data variable here. So I'm going to comment this for a second. And let's just do this. Let's just do a console log really quickly here. And I'm just going to say form submitted. And then I'll add another console log below this, where I'm going to just console log this. It's a special keyword. So I'm going to go back here. Let's just reload this. And let's open our console. So I'm going to right click and inspect. And it's going to open this. We're going to go to console. Whatever's here, I'm going to clear for now. And this is all clear. So at this point, if I just hit submit button, see how it says form submitted. And notice this next one is that this. And that this is really the form itself. So what's happening here, we have this event listener on the form itself. And when we do this event to submit the event and we run that function, within that function, this will refer to the form itself. So now, let's just do this. When we run this backend function with Google script run accept data, we'll just send this, which is the form itself, to our backend, to this accept data. And we will accept that here as form data. Let's just do console log form data so that we can see what this looks like. So this console log is happening in this GS file. So that's a backend function. So for our HTML console logs here, we'll look at those in this console in our browser. For this console log, we're going to open our executions. So let's take a look. So I'm going to go back, reload this thing. Let's clear this. I'm going to enter some data, something like that, and hit submit. Let's go and take a look at our console logs. So here, we'll go to our executions here and see this last one going to that accept data. And if you look here, you'll see what we get here is an object. And this object has this properties, notes, first name, category, last name. And those properties are coming from our, where is it? If I go back in our HTML, from these names here. See, the name is first name in that form. So therefore, if I go back and look at my object, we have that first name and we have the value that was passed Anna, and then last name and value that was passed Smith. So now we should be able to access all of these different things like first name, last name, etc. So I should be able to simply just go here and do form data dot first name, and that should give me the first name from the form, just like that. Now I need to add this information to my spreadsheet over here. So first I'm going to name this tab down here, info. Now let's go to our script and write some code here. So we'll create a constant SS that will basically just store our spreadsheet. So we'll do spreadsheet app get active spreadsheet. So this refers to the entire spreadsheet. Now in that spreadsheet, we need to get the worksheet. So we'll do get sheet by name. So the worksheet is called info down here. So that's what I'm going to pass here. And on that worksheet, we'll have this append row method, which allows us to add an array. See, here's an example. It's a comma separated list. And each part is going to be one of the columns. So for example, if I do just cut this, put it here, form data first name, that should give us the first name of that person. Now let's actually go back here and just name this first column first name, like this. So at this point, we should access the worksheet info and then add a new line with this data, first name. So first of all, let's see if this works. So because we're accessing the spreadsheet here, we need to make sure we give permission to access the spreadsheet. I've done scripts in this particular file before. So when I go here and go accept data right now and run it, it will not ask me to set any permissions. But for you, if you're doing this the first time, what you're going to have to do, you're going to have to run this function to set all the permissions necessary. Otherwise, you're going to get permission errors. So I'm going to open this, run that. See, for me, I just get an error right away because I don't need to set permissions. But in your case, you would get a pop-up, you would set your permissions, and you will get this error. This is fine. So it says, cannot read property first name of undefined, because if I just straight up run this function, accept data, form data doesn't exist. So it's undefined, so I get that error. But once permissions are set, now we should be able to go back here, reload this, and I'm going to go here and enter some first and last name and hit submit. And as you can see, I got nothing here, but let's go back to our spreadsheet, and you can see I got Linda here. And basically, I was able to send that information here as the first name and add the information. Now, if I wanted to add the last names too, then I'm going to do another column here and match the field, which was called last name, like this. So if I save this, go back and resubmit this, now we should add another line. See, Linda Smith, both of them. I'm going to call it last name. Let me delete this. So now we can basically add all the other data we have here, like department, category, etc. So I'm going to add those here. And we also had notes and this checkbox, right? So notes, and I'm just going to call it offers. Now we need to access all this information. We just need to comma separate those here. Now, I'm just going to make this a little easier to read by sending this to a new line. We don't have to. And I'm just going to add a few more of these here. No comma after the last one. So after the last name, I need department and category, and we need to just match these names here. See, department. So I'm going to match that. Actually, it's here. And then we got notes, which is this. And then finally, we got this checkbox. Let's go check that, this input. And I called that one offers. It's case sensitive, so we have to make sure we do lowercase the same way, uppercase, etc. So those are my fields. Let's go back and resubmit the form after I save this and see what happens. So I'm going to go here and add some information. Submit this. Let's go check it out. So as you can see, I was able to send all of that here. We have a new line and it works just fine. And if I go back and uncheck the checkbox and hit submit, it's basically the same thing, except that this doesn't say on because our checkbox wasn't checked. So we're able to send our information. Now, what we want to do probably, we want to reset this form once that information was sent to our form. So right now it just stays here just like this, even though it was submitted. So to handle that, we're going to go back to our HTML side. So this is how we run that function, that accept data. Now we're going to add two callbacks here. So we have these two methods. One of them is for successful submissions, the other one for basically failed submissions. So we're going to need a function for each one of those. So always remember that everything in JavaScript is case sensitive. So if you miss one of these, uppercase, lowercase, it's just going to fail. Now, this is where our success is going to go. So right here, and this is when it fails. So right now, I don't care about when it fails. I'm just going to go with success. So once it's successful submitting that form, let's try to reset the form. So I'm going to take this form, contact form, and we'll do reset. So I'm going to save this. Now, these changes are happening in our HTML. So I do have to refresh this. So I'm going to add some information here. What I'm concerned about is some of these dropdowns here with this reset, because they're external things created by Metro UI. So I'm not sure if it's going to reset those two or not. So I'm going to go ahead and submit. Now you'll see how it submitted this. First and last names are reset. Notes and checkbox is reset, but these dropdowns are not. So we did submit that new line. We'll reset most of the form except of these dropdowns, and this is what I was worried about. Now I have to take care of these dropdowns manually. Now, if you're using basic HTML without Metro UI, or maybe you are on Bootstrap, this should automatically reset those select boxes too. For me, it does not. So I have to reset those myself. So to reset those, let's go grab all the select elements within our form. So I'm going to do contact form, which really refers to this variable up here. And I'll do query selector all. And we'll find all select elements. Let's save this in a variable like this. And now hopefully we'll be able to work with those. But before we do so, let's just make sure this does select those elements. So I'm going to console log those select elements. Let's save this. I'm going to go back, refresh this page, pick some items here, hit submit, and there it is. I got a node list, see, with 2 select elements. So now what we're going to do, we're going to find the instance of Metro UI for these. So for example, if I have the first one of those, that would be select element 0. Now, what we'll do metro dot get plugin and pass that first element. And we'll say that should be a select element. And we'll also save this. I'll just call it S1 in a variable. So let's just do a quick console log of that Metro element. And let's see what that looks like. So now we should log this and this. Hopefully I got this syntax right. If not, we'll have to go check in Metro documentation. So I'll refresh this. Again, let's just pick something, hit submit. Now you'll see this is that first console log, and this is my second. So this is our Metro element. See, you can see we have like component, we have all these different things, and we have prototypes here, which will be some methods available on that Metro component. And if I keep scrolling down here, see we have this val method, which allows us to set the value, and we'll just set it to blank. So what that means is that I should be able to do s1.val and then pass like an empty string to set the value to nothing. Now, if I save this and go back and reload this, let's just do this. If I hit submit, see, after it was submitted, department was now set to blank, which is what I wanted, but it's not going to do the category. So to do the category, instead of doing just this one, which is what I did so far, I'm just going to do a loop here. So we'll loop through the select elements. We don't need this console log anymore. So we'll do for each loop. And for each element, we'll do a callback. And we basically just have to do this. So I'm just going to paste it here. And here, instead of select element 0, we'll just say element, which will be the element in the loop. So the first one, the second one, the third one, if we keep adding more select boxes, it would just grab all of them. So we'll get the element, which I've called S1. So we'll just call it temp select. And then we'll take that temp select and set the value to nothing. So hopefully this should take care of it. So this should reset most of the form, and this will help us reset all the select elements in our form. So let's go back and test this, make sure this works. I'm going to make sure I delete all of this stuff. And let's just go ahead and reload this and submit this form. And as you can see, it did submit the form and it was reset. We have our new line here. It all works like it was supposed to. So far so good. So you could just use it like this, but maybe you want a new page to open up that says it was submitted. So let's do that. So I'm going to go back. And what I'll do, we have this div for the form. So we have this form here. So it starts here and it ends here. So that's our actual form. So below this form, let's add another div, which will be one of these row structures. So let me just copy one of those. Because we're still in the grid, I'm going to do Shift Tab to go back one level. There's no button. There's no form group. So what I'll do here, I'll just say, thanks for submitting. And as of right now, if I just go back and reload, you'll see it basically just shows thanks for submitting down here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add an ID for this too. Actually, let's go with the dash to keep it consistent. Now I'm going to make sure I get this success message in my JavaScript. So I'll go here, see similar to how we got this form. We need to now get that success message. So I'm going to copy paste this, change this to success message, and name that success message, I guess, like this. So this way we can access the contact form and the message that's below that contact form. And by default, I want this to be hidden. So let's see if there is a class for hidden stuff here in Metro UI. So usually that will go under probably utilities or something like that. Let's see if they have it. See, they have utilities down here. Let's open that. See, display visibility. So see, dnone should make it invisible. So let's copy that. If I go back and add that dnone class to this row, I save this, that should make this part invisible. And as you can see, it's gone. So what I want to happen when the submission is successful, I want to hide the form. So let's do that hiding and showing process. So I'm going to go back and scroll down. And after this is submitted, we're going to take our contact form, and to the class list, we're going to add that dnone class to hide the contact form. And then we'll take that success message, and to the class list of this, in this case, we're not going to add, we're going to remove that same dnone class. So since we're going to remove that dnone from this, it will make it visible, and we're going to add it to this, it will make this one invisible. So let's test this. I'm going to save this. We'll go back, reload this. Again, something like this. I'm going to hit submit. And see, the form is gone. It says, thanks for submitting. Now you may want to have a button here to allow us to go back to the form to submit something else. So let's add something like that too. So I'm going to go back on top here. Let's just add a button. And we'll say back to form. We'll add an ID for this button. So we're going to need, again, to access this button by its ID in our JavaScript. So I'm going to scroll down here. We're going to add a line here to do so. I'll copy one of these. Replace the ID with our actual ID for the button. Create a variable. And to this, we need to add an event similar to this, but it's going to be after all of this. So after the submit, I'm just going to scroll down. We'll take that back to form button. We'll add an event listener. The event this time is going to be click on that button. And we're going to run a function. Now, I could create that function separately like I did here and do it here. But in this one, I'm just going to do the function right here. I've missed the arrow. And basically, we just need to do that hiding and displaying thing. So I'm just going to copy these two lines, paste it here. So when we go back, we need to display the form. So therefore, we're going to remove the none. And we need to hide that message. So we're going to add the none to the message. That's pretty much it. So I'm going to save this. We'll go back, reload this. We should now have a form. I'm going to type something. Let's just pick some options here, some notes. Click this. See, now it was submitted. We got our back to form button. I'm going to click on that. And that brings us back to our form, which was already reset. So if we want to submit another one, now we can. And again, the same thing is going to happen. And I can go back, and now we should have those records. Now we have a working form that submits, sends our information to our spreadsheet, and clears the form like it should. So at this point, I'm going to need to add some validation to this. So basically what I mean by that, right now we can enter pretty much anything we want in this form, or even not enter anything at all and hit submit, and it's going to go through. So let's assume some of these fields are going to be required, like first name, last name, maybe category. So let's see how we can accomplish that. So for that, let's go to their documentation again, and I'm going to move out to this components section. Let's go to forms again. And on the right side here, let's go to see validation. And it says we highly recommend using this. So let's click on this and see what this is. So basically, here's an example. If I click here, see it gives us this red lines and some warning messages. And basically it says you need to add this attribute to the form and this attribute to your inputs. Okay, that makes sense. So I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to copy these two attributes, and we're going to add those to the form. So I'm going to go back to our own HTML, find the form, and paste it right here as my attributes. Now let's go back and see what the other part was. So the other part is, see, there's the input, and we're going to do this data validate attribute. So I'm going to copy that, go back, and assuming this first name would be one of those required ones, we'll just add this within this input tag as an attribute. And here there is this minimum length. We'll use that for this. That makes sense. So we'll do like 2 characters long minimum for first names. And at this point, let's just see what happens. So I'm going to go back and reload this. So I'm not going to enter anything and hit submit and see what happens. Okay, that was interesting. It went red for a second here, but then it went through anyways. So it didn't stop this form from being submitted. So let's get back to their documentation here. And I'm going to have to scroll down a little bit here. See, there are a lot of different ways to validate. You can make sure it's a URL. You can make sure it's a date, apparently. But we don't need any of that right now. Events. So see, there's this data on submit. And then it does this submission. So I think that's what we're going to use. I'm going to copy this. And we'll go back and we're going to add this to our form again. Here, I'm going to add that as an extra attribute. It goes to the next line. Now here they have this keyword they use within this alert, but we're going to have to change this function here. So I'm going to save this for a second here. The function we used to use for our form used to be this submit data. And this is where we prevent the default behavior, and then we end up doing this. Now, we're going to need probably a different function here. So this is the end of this submit data. So I'm going to go below that, and we'll create another function. I'm going to call it add record. And what I'll do, I'll basically just grab, well, pretty much all of this right here. I'll still prevent the default here, and I'll just paste that as our add record function. Let me just tap this in. So pretty much everything else we had before, where we're going to add the record, we're going to clear the form, and we're going to send this to our backend, which is going to be this. And I'm going to hope that this is going to still be the form itself, so we can submit it to our backend. But I guess we're going to have to find out. So see data on submit, and it says context form. So I'm going to assume this is going to refer to the form still. Now we need to make sure we run this function though, add record. So I'm going to copy that, go back to the top, and as this data on submit instead of this alert, I'm not sure if I have to do like this, like call the function here, or just name the function. So let's just try this and see what happens. So I'm going to do this, and let's just see what happens. So we're going to save this. I'm going to go back and reload this, clear this. So right now, if I hit submit, it says form submitted. It does this, but I don't think it did the new line part, but it's hard to tell. Let's actually just add some sort of last name here, and then leave this and hit submit, which should prevent it from submitting again because this is not entered. So let's go see if Smith is here. No, so this is good. It was not submitted. Now, if I enter one character, it should still not submit anything. And it didn't. So now let's try to enter something that will actually submit. So looks like it did. And we got it here. All right, so I was able to add that validation back to form. We're back here. So now if I submit again, it's going to stop this. Again, let's just verify that. I'm going to hit submit again. Now that should not go here. Good. So it works. Now let's add validation to last name as well. So that should now be pretty straightforward. All I would have to do, from what I can tell, just scroll up, find this required data validate attribute and add it to this last name input too. And I guess I'll leave it 2 characters again. That should be fine. So that should validate first and last names. Now I said I also wanted to make sure category was required. Let's see how we validate that. So is there an example of validating a list? Let's just go back to the top here. Required. There it is. Radio select. So it says data validate required not -1. So it cannot be this value, basically. So let me try this. So I'm going to copy this, go back. And for me, it's going to be this category select. So I'm going to add it to that. But I can't do -1 unless I do like value equals -1 like this, then I guess it would work. So if nothing else, this should do it, but I want to try something else. What if I just leave this empty and do not? I want to do blank, and I cannot use double quotes because I'm in double quotes. So let's just do double single quotes, meaning not blank. Let's see if this works. If it doesn't, we'll do the value method and do something like that. So I'm going to save this, go back and reload. So now hopefully it should validate. See, it's kind of coloring blue, the ones that are required. Great. So if I hit submit, now it should color all of those red. So let's go ahead and enter some name. Now, if I submit, see, these are now green, so they're good, but category is still invalid. So apparently that blank validation worked. So I'm going to go here and choose dress shirt and hit submit. And that went through. Good. So that works. Now let's just make sure if I go back to the form, see, looks like it's validating again. So I'm going to do one more. So if I hit submit, this should not let us through. It's not adding anything. And now let's do some category. Good. So that works. No problem. So now we have validation. So at this point, we can just use their different validation methods by just adding that data validate and whatever that field is. And as you can see, there are a lot of different options here you can use, which is great. So built-in validation. One thing that's a little annoying is the way this submits. So initially, if I enter something here, when I click, see, we have to wait a second until it submits and finishes this whole thing, but it's not really clear what's happening. So we may want to have some spinner or maybe disable the form. So let's go find what they have here. So do we have like a spinner or something like that? Progress. Let's try this. This is pretty nice. Okay, so maybe we should use that. So what I'll do, I'll copy this and we'll go to our HTML. I'm going to scroll down right to this success message part. And we'll basically do another one for that progress. So I'll just paste whatever they had. So we're going to have to put both of these as a content here. So we'll just grab this div, which is the row with column, copy paste that, grab our spinners. And instead of this, we'll paste that. And here, we'll just call this progress. And again, by default, this will be d-none, so not visible. But we'll make it visible later in our code. So let's go grab this progress ID. So we'll scroll down, see we have these 3. Now let's add one more. like so. Now, as soon as we submit the form, so basically right here, when we start adding the record, this is where we run that Google script run function, and we have to wait. So what we'll do right before we do this, we'll just hide the rest and basically make this progress visible. So I'm going to do progress class list dot add. Actually, we want to make it visible, so it will be remove dnone, similar to this. So that should make that spinner visible, and I want to make the form invisible, which means we need like this line where we make the form invisible. So I'm going to cut that and paste it here. So we'll make the spinner visible and form invisible, and then we'll try to submit the data. And then we'll wait until hopefully it's successful. And if it is, we're going to do all of these things, right? So we're going to reset the form. We're going to reset all the select elements. We're going to make that success message visible. And we have to, at that point, make that progress invisible. So we'll add that dnone. So let's see how this works out. So I'm going to save this, go back, and reload this. So now if I submit, see, we got the spinner until it's done. Then we get to this. And if I go back to form, we're back here. Let's try this again to make sure this works for the next record as well. And yes, it does. Good. So we got the spinner, we got the validation. So at this point, I'm going to try to add some spacing to some of these fields so they're not right next to each other. Let's see if there is some padding built in here. So I'm going to search padding, see spacing. Let's go here and see padding classes. So it seems like if we do something like p-1, it should add some padding. So let's try that. So I'm going to copy this. So I want to add padding to probably all of these columns. So it's going to push all these things in a little bit. So I'm going to scroll up. Let's see what happens if we add some padding to this column here and to this column here. So that's for first and last names. Save this. Let's just take a look. So that's nice. See, there's a little padding. So now everything is spaced away. So I'll do that for our select boxes. Let's see if it works the same way. So I'm going to go one for this and one for this. So if you want more padding, you could use, see, like P2, P3. It seems like as you increase the size, it should have more padding, but I'm really happy with this padding, so that's good enough for me. Just to make sure this aligns, I'm going to add padding to this as well. So I'm going to scroll down and add padding to this as well, and to this, and to this. You could also say I should probably add it for the submit button and all of this as well. You could do that, but I don't care about it that much. So I'll just do this, see everything is aligned. Looks pretty good. You could add more spacing by using some margins and stuff like that. It's all here. So all of this is pretty much what I wanted to do. The only thing I'm going to add to this entire thing, I'm going to make sure that we automatically fill one of these dropdowns from some options that we have in our spreadsheet. So for example, this categories dropdown, I want to have someplace in my spreadsheet. I'm going to add a tab, call it settings or something. And I want to basically just list a bunch of categories here. And then I want to use those categories within that dropdown automatically instead of hard coding this dropdown. So let's first of all just enter some categories here. I'm just going to copy paste something here. So I'm just going to name this categories. And this is the list I want to load in our form over here as the list of categories. To do so, let's first just create a function to grab this list of categories from this spreadsheet called settings. So we'll go back and go to this backend functions. We'll create another function here. I'm going to call it get categories. Now, I don't want this function to be called from external sources, so I'm going to do underscore in this function name, and we'll basically just do something similar to this. So I'm going to copy paste that. The name of the tab is called settings. And we need to take that worksheet and get range. And the range is from A2 through A. So starting in second row, and I'm going all the way down, which will also include all these empty rows. For that reason, I'm going to delete extra rows from the spreadsheet just so that it takes less time. Okay, from A2 all the way down. So we'll do get values. Now I want to filter these values to not include those blanks. So I'm going to do filter, and we'll take each row and make sure that the row is not equal to blank. And then I'll just make this one-dimensional array because it's going to be a two-dimensional array right now by simply just grabbing that from that first column. And now this category should be one-dimensional array of those values. So we'll just return those categories. So now we should have this function. When we call this, it should return an array of categories. Okay, so now we need to grab these categories and we need to use it here. And to use it here, we need to send it to this HTML side from here. Now we're going to do that when we'll load this HTML. Now, if you remember when I said initially I'm going to use this template from file because that's going to allow us to use templating within HTML. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. Now what we can do before we evaluate this to create the HTML, we can now attach some properties to that HTML. Like for example, I can do HTML service categories and then make it equal to whatever I want it to be. Now, in our case, it's going to be the results of this function. So I'm going to call this function, get that array of categories, and I'm going to assign it to this categories property on this HTML service. Let's type that right. And then because we do this, we should be able to access those categories here in our template. So what I should be able to do, I should be able to run some JavaScript code right here by using scriptlets, which is the special tags in this templating engine. And in this, we're going to basically just do a loop. So I have that variable categories now, which I passed over here. And we should be able to loop through this. So what I'll do, I'll just do a for loop. Actually, we can probably make this constant. And this will start the loop. So usually you'll open the loop and close the loop here, but I want to do some things in the middle. So for closing the loop, I'm going to go a couple of lines down and I'm going to add another one of the scripts and we'll just close that loop here. No period. That's that. So this will start the loop. This will end the loop. And right in the middle, we'll do things we want in the loop. And what I want in this loop is basically a bunch of options. So if I copy one of this and paste it, I'll just paste it, I guess, here on this level of these options. So here now I want to output the category. So what I'll do another script tag here. And because this needs to output the results, I'm going to also use this equal sign, and we'll use that variable category. Because otherwise, if I don't do equals, it will just get the variable, but not output the variable. So let's see if this works. So hopefully I don't need these options anymore. So the logic here is that this first one is just going to be that disabled first blank option. And then the rest of the options here, we're going to dynamically load by getting that list of categories, looping through all of them, and outputting option for each category. So let's save this and see if this works. So I'm going to go back and reload. So no errors, that's a good sign. Let's open this. Great, we got a list, as you can see, of those categories that were coming from here. See? And because we have this fancy dropdown, we should be able to, instead of scrolling up and down, just search and pick an item. So let's enter something in our form. I'm going to just fill the whole thing for this test, hit submit. Did that, sent the data hopefully here. Very good. And at this point, if we wanted to add more options to that dropdown, we should be able to just add those options here in our spreadsheet. So now that option should load as one of those options as well. So if I just reload this, here we should have that Superman, see, down there, which again, we can just search. Now, before I finish this, I also wanted to change the button that says back to look more like a button. So let's go to their docs and add that too, and we should be all set. So we'll go back here. I'm going to find, let's just search button. See, we have these different buttons. I'm just going to keep it simple. I'll just use this secondary, which should be the third one. So we need to add this class. So I'm going to copy that, go to our button, which will be that back button we have here. Well, actually, this is submit button. This is the back button. So we're going to add that class. So at this point, hopefully that works. So let's just reload this, submit the form. And there's back to form button now styled this way. If I click on it, it goes back to our initial page, and that should add the record here. And again, we have our validation now. So if we don't fill in the form as required, we hit submit. That should not add Jane. And it does give us, see, this red highlighting for our required fields. So we need to actually fill those in. And that does pretty much everything I wanted to do here. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.